Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on Women in Medicine. My name is Karen Labello. I'm Director of Education for the New York Chapter ACP, and our facilitators today are Dr. Linda Koshy. She's a Fellow of Cardiovascular Disease, Division of Cardiology at NYU Langone Health, Dr. Nancy Levine, Associate Chief of General Internal Medicine and Assistant Professor of Medicine at Zucker School of Medicine, and then Dr. Ankita Sagar. She is Director of Ambulatory Quality Medicine, Medicine Service Line, Attending Physician, Department of Health, Northwell Health, and Chair of New York Chapter ACP's Early Career Physician Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to review a couple guidelines. All participants will be on mute, and since we have such a large audience. If you have a question, please type it in the dialog box on the right, and one of our presenters will answer the question at the end of the presentation. If we run over the allotted time, we will send the answers to your questions through an email. We will have the recorded version of today's webinar posted on our website at www.nyacp.org on the recorded webinars page and on the early career physician page also. This webinar is accredited for 1 CME credit hour. Following the webinar, I'll be sending all participants an email with instructions on how to claim your CME credit. I would now like to introduce our first presenter, Dr. Linda Koshy.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Before we start, I would like to preface and say that although our topic today is women in medicine, some of the issues and challenges that we'll be discussing are also applicable to other marginalized groups in medicine. So with that in mind, I'll start with my objectives. First, we're going to recognize the compensation disparities between men and women physicians, and then delve into the trends and promotions for women in medicine and identify strategies for retention and promotion of women. So first, to understand pay inequity in medicine, we must first understand what salary equity means. Salary equity, according to the AMC, refers to whether or not individuals have access to opportunities that allow them to earn and be paid similar compensation for comparable work, given shared qualifications, regardless of differences in individual characteristics, such as gender, race, age, sexual orientation, religion, and disability. So today, we're going to focus salary equity with regards to gender. Where do compensation disparities exist currently in medicine? The answer is basically everywhere. Compensation disparities exist in primary care, among subspecialists, within academia, as well as among those pursuing research careers. So in the next few slides, I'll show you the current data on each of these areas. To begin with, let's look at some basic survey data. If we look at the Medscape Physician Compensation Report of 2019, male primary care physicians reported average annual earnings of $258,000, compared with female respondents reporting $207,000. So this is a 25% gap by gender. Then, if we look at subspecialists by gender, male specialists on average earned $372,000 compared to women reporting an average of $280,000. So men earned 33% more than women subspecialists. Now, this is just basic survey data, which is plenty of limitations, as we all know in medicine. Critics of the Medscape survey argue that the data does not account for work hours, part-time or full-time, or years of experience. So I was able to find some more data that debunks these theories. This next study was particularly interesting to me since I'm soon going to be looking for a job, and it used survey data from physicians exiting training programs in New York State from 1999 to 2008 to see how salary differences by gender have changed over time. So by focusing on starting salaries, confounding variables such as experience, rank within an institution, and on-the-job productivity could be avoided. And the focus was on graduating residents and fellows who reported that after completing their training, their primary activity would be patient care and clinical practice, which is what the majority of trainees leaving training programs will be doing. So if we look at their Exhibit 1, it shows that no matter the practice type, the location type, or patient care hours per week, the mean starting salary for women were lower than that of men. And then when comparing mean starting salaries by specialty, women had lower average starting salaries than men for nearly all specialties. And now finally, in Exhibit 3, the dashed lines represent the adjusted predicted salaries for men and women over time. The authors adjusted for multiple factors, including race and ethnicity, age, practice type, location type, and patient care hours. And although the starting salary differences between men and women were actually not statistically significant in 1999, by 2008, there was a substantial salary difference of $16,819 between men and women. Moving forward, inequity in academia also exists. A study of over 10,000 physicians in 24 US public medical schools found the annual salaries of female physicians to be lower than those of male physicians. And the authors again adjusted for multiple confounding factors such as faculty rank, age, years since residency, publication count, and total Medicare payments. And even after all these adjustments, there was a greater than $20,000 pay difference between men and women. If we look at by institution, the adjusted salaries of male physicians were significantly higher than the salaries of female physicians in 9 of the 24 schools. So the silver lining is that some of these schools were getting it right. Finally, if I haven't hit the point home already, the same inequity exists in the research world. This study looked at NIH, K08, and K23 award recipients to determine the pay gap for physician researchers. They found that male research physicians earned roughly $200,000 annually compared with $168,000 for female physicians, which is an unadjusted $33,000 pay gap. They then controlled for a multitude of confounding factors, including age, advanced degrees, number of publications, institution rank, percentage of research time, and found that female research physicians still made $12,000 less. So why does this matter? Beyond the basic inequality or unfairness of the situation, pay inequity has been found to contribute to burnout in women and can therefore be a contributing factor as to why women leave medicine. And ultimately, we should be trying to combat women leaving the field of medicine, if at the very least, given the expected physician shortage over the next 10 to 15 years. Luckily, numerous medical societies have proposed ideas and strategies for institutions to implement in order to bring about change, including the AMC. They put out this paper, Promising Practices for Understanding and Addressing Salary Equity at US Medical Schools. And their recommendations and strategies included the following. One, to begin with, in the early stages of your career, training on contract and salary negotiations can help mitigate the gender pay gap. Women may not be made aware of what components of their compensation are negotiable, such as administrative assistance, office space, or even medical equipment. Teaching women how to negotiate can also change the implicit biases and cultural narratives around negotiation by women. On an institutional level, it's important for pay structures to be based on objective, gender-neutral criteria, with an emphasis on transparency. When compensations are regularly reviewed and transparent, issues of equity can be more easily addressed and understood. And to do so, this may involve conducting salary equity studies to understand the pay gap that exists at one's institution. Luckily, again, numerous institutions have conducted salary equity studies beginning as far back as the 1990s. One successful example is UT Southwestern used the information from their salary equity studies to change their practice plan appointments to allow for more part-time positions and on-site childcare for faculty who take parental leave. Now, what can you do on an individual level? So it's important to talk among male and female colleagues about pay, benefits, insurance, vacations, and retirement plans to see what each other have been offered. This focus on transparency extends to the individual level. We can address the discrepancies in pay, and by being open with each other, we can identify differences that can then be negotiated for. By normalizing negotiation by women, we can remove the stigma associated with it. And then finally, advocacy from our male colleagues can go a long way. When and if discrepancies are identified, bringing it up to leadership is important, as well as just listening to your colleagues about their experiences. Many men have often told me they never even realized or noticed the gender issue in a situation until they heard my side of the story. So all these efforts from an individual and institutional level take time, but can bring about effective change to address the issue of the gender pay gap. And then similar to salary disparities, leadership disparities exist as well, with female physicians underrepresented in the higher ranks of medical school faculty. According to the AMC, although women accounted for about 41% of full-time medical school faculty in 2018, they made up only 25% of tenured faculty and only 25% of full professors. And as you can see, the percentage of women decreases at each level of rank. And this discrepancy is out of proportion to the percentage of women who are in medicine 10, 15, 20 years ago who would and should now be promoted to professor rank. In the more recent era, this discrepancy still exists. Based on the AAMC faculty salary survey, here are the 7-year promotion outcomes for full-time, first-time, assistant professors, and associate professors in the academic year 2008 to 2009. The dark purple color indicates men and women who are promoted within the same department. In both categories, fewer women are promoted than men by percentage. The key takeaway from this is the percentage of full-time women faculty who advanced in rank during a 7-year period was smaller than that for men during the same period. But what I also find interesting is the percentage, both men and women, who leave academic medicine among those not promoted from assistant to associate professor, with the higher percentage of women leaving academic medicine than men, comparing the 38% to 32%. These statistics lead us to the issue of the leaky pipeline. There are many qualified women entering the field of medicine. If we look at the subspecialty of cardiology, for example, which is my subspecialty, despite the fact that approximately half of all medical students are women, and approximately half of women are internal medicine residents, only a quarter are cardiology fellows, and even a smaller percentage of women pursue a procedural subspecialty, and then less and less so down that pipeline, becoming full professors or leaders of national organizations. In order to counteract and change this phenomenon, here's some strategies for retaining and promoting women in medicine. To begin with, training on implicit bias and policies for members of promotion committees can help ensure equitable treatment of women, as well as recruit diverse candidates. Promotion committees should include women and include women representing all the academic pathways, research, clinical, medical education, and the percentage of women on each committee should be representative of that field. So, for example, in internal medicine, a search committee should have 50% women rather than a quote-unquote token women on the committee. Workshops about the promotion processes for faculty can be helpful to educate the faculty about the steps involved, particularly in departments or fields where there are fewer mentors for women and they are not made aware of the steps involved. This again focuses on the theme of transparency. And then similar to salary equity studies, tracking institutional progress is important to understand the trends, identify areas that need improvement in order to retain women. So if an institution or department is not aware of a downtrend, for example, how can it be fixed? And I will not go into detail on mentorship and networking, as we have a dedicated objectives on this, but it's also key to retaining and promoting women. And then finally, some universities allocate funds to women's scholars programs to develop female faculty. And this can include funding for women to attend national leadership workshops. So there are quite a few of these workshops and opportunities for women. One of them is the Drexel University Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine program. It's a year-long part-time fellowship for women, and it develops women the professional and personal skills to lead and manage in today's health environment, with special attention to the unique challenges women face in leadership positions. There are also conferences dedicated to women, such as the AMC Mid-Career Women Faculty Leadership Seminar, the Women in Medicine Summit, based out of the major academic institutions in Chicago, as well as the GRIT conference sponsored by Mayo. Ultimately, this diagram effectively sums up the spectrum of strategies for retention and promotion of women in medicine, from an individual level to the institution and up to a policy level. Ultimately, the challenges that women in medicine face can be improved with the collective efforts of men and women, advocating and bringing about effective change to better the lives of all doctors and subsequently our own patients. So with that, I'm going to transition to Dr. Nancy Levine, who will be focusing on flexibility in the workplace.
All right, everyone. So good afternoon. I don't know if it's raining in all parts of New York, but it's pretty grim here on Long Island. So today I am going to talk about some of the flexible workplace initiatives that we may have to really support women in medicine. So specifically, we're going to talk about the policies for maternity, paternity leave, or family leave, especially those supported by professional organizations such as ACP. And we're going to talk about ways which we can support physician mothers or caregivers, including flexible work schedules, part-time work, and breastfeeding support should you choose to pursue breastfeeding as part of your parenting. All right, so my story. So the first thing I want to share is that, so full disclosure, I have 2 children. I had my 2 children when I was an early attending in primary care. I had my first child. I played by all the rules. I took 12 weeks leave and returned to work full time. And when I got pregnant with my second child, my husband said to me, "Have you ever thought about taking more time off after the baby's born?" And I said, "No, you can't do that in medicine." And he asked me why not, and I had no good answer for him, except that I felt like it was something that women in medicine just didn't do. You did what you were allowed, and that was it. So after that, I kind of realized, to make a long story short, I did take extra time off, but I realized I knew very, very little about what I was allowed to do, what was commonplace. So those are some of the things I'm going to focus on today. So specifically, let's talk about the policies around parental leave. So what's the law say? Specifically, there are 2 types of laws for this. One is federal, and that is FMLA, which we'll go into, and the other one is state-specific, which relates to paid family leave. So FMLA, and as a primary care physician, I fill out a lot of FMLA forms for patients, and that was really the extent of my knowledge prior to becoming a mom. FMLA is a federal law that provides unpaid job protective leave. It means you have 12 weeks to leave to care for a newborn, a newly adopted, an ill child, or any immediate family that is not an in-law. It applies to public agencies, so it includes government employers and local education agencies. It only applies to employers who have more than 50 employees, and you have to have been employed for 12 months prior to taking a leave to be eligible for it. So focus here is on the fact that this is unpaid leave, but does protect your job. So again, it's limited to a couple of groups. If you work for a small medical practice, say 20 providers, you wouldn't be eligible for FMLA. It's dependent on the amount of time that you've worked for the organization that you've been there. It also, using FMLA as a parental leave strategy really does depend on your ability to go unpaid for those 12 weeks if you take the 12 weeks. FMLA does not apply to medical students, which is important to know if you are a up-and-coming medical student. It does apply to fellows and residents, but because of the way taking 12 weeks out of your training can affect your ability to meet your training schedule, it can be limited in its applicability. So if you're thinking about the political landscape, and as you probably know, the United States is one of the very few, if not the only country now that does not offer paid family leave at the federal level, at the major government level. So this is something that will hopefully change. In the current climate, there's been two kind of kicked around ideas for federal legislation, one from Kirsten Gillibrand, our own New York State Senator, who suggested the Family Act, which was 12 weeks of paid leave for family and personal medical needs, which was going to be funded through a payroll tax. And then Camilla, oh my God, I'm blanking on Camilla's last name. Our current presidential candidate has suggested the Children's Agenda, which would give paid leave for 6 months, but she has not suggested how she would pay for it. So given the importance of this, it's surprising that this is not a bigger conversation on the national stage. So luckily, we are from New York, which is one of a handful of states that actually has paid family leave. So paid family leave policies exist in California, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., and Massachusetts has just passed theirs to start in 2021. So this allows employees in New York State to take paid family leave. So FMLA will protect your job, but New York State will allow you to get paid while you take family leave. It allows you to bond with a newly born, adopted, or fostered child, care for a family member, or to assist if you have family members who are deployed in military service. So when you get paid with paid family leave, what does that mean? It's based on the average weekly wage for New York State, and you are allowed to have, currently in this year, 2019, 10 weeks of leave at 55% of your average weekly wage. And currently in New York State, that's 55% of the 2017 standards, which is $1,357 a week. As you can see, as this legislation was enacted, it's kind of a blend-in period over the next couple of years, and by 2021, it will be 12 weeks of leave with up to 67 or 2/3 of your average weekly wage. So that's good news for New York, and we're very much ahead of the curve. All right, so it can be used for any family member. It can be taken all at once or intermittently, meaning if you have a spouse that also has paid family leave, you guys can alternate different times, so you may be home with a child for a longer period. It provides job protection. It provides continuation of your health insurance benefits and protection from retaliation for taking the time off. It does not necessarily apply to public workers or union employees. They have to be negotiated separately. So what are some of the logistical challenges to taking leave? For a resident or a fellow in particular, it's going to extend your need for schooling or training. If you're a practitioner in a faculty position, you may need to have clinical coverage. This would apply for trainees as well. It may impact small practices in a big way. You may need to hire temporary employees or per diems, and there may be some backfilling of your position or a need to adjust pay. So a lot of physicians, in my experience, and I did the same thing, are worried about taking leave because of the impact it may have on other people. So when they've done studies on this, they've shown that among physician mothers, about 80% reported some discrimination because they were a mother. That 90% felt they were discriminated against for taking maternity leave, and about 50% reported it was due to breastfeeding on the job. So there can be some animosity from coworkers and asking to take coverage. You hear stories all the time about women being asked to make up all of their call time when they return from work, as if they had never taken the time off at all. And we always, I think, in the back of our minds worry that if childbearing is in my future, I don't want to discuss that with concerned employers because it may limit my ability to get a job. And for residents and fellows in particular, there may be a need to extend their residency training, and this can be a big deal in the academic cycle, and a lot of people may limit their plans because of that. So Dr. Susan Hingle is one of the authors of the ACP's position paper on women in medicine. If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it. She did a podcast with the Curbsiders, and she had this quote from there, which I thought was brilliant. "It is not our job to worry about what our residency colleagues will say if we take time off to care for our ill parent or if we have a child. It is not our job to figure out who will provide coverage if we take time off. People are, in fact, paid to deal with figuring this out. Program directors, program coordinators. We need to take that out of the picture as much as possible to assess our current priorities in the moment. I thought this was brilliant because I think women physicians in particular have a large guilt complex, and I think this is her way of saying we shouldn't. So objective 2 is to really identify ways in which we can support physician caregivers, including flexible work schedules, part-time, and breastfeeding support. So like Dr. Koshy mentioned, I do think it's really important for women to talk about these things. When I had my children, I didn't have a lot of female colleagues that had been through childcare issues, breastfeeding in the workplace in some time, so I didn't really feel I had a network to discuss these issues with. I would say that the more I talk about breastfeeding at work, pumping, and things of those nature, the more I realize that a lot of women are going through this. So I encourage people to be very open about their family situations, that they have children, that they're breastfeeding, that they just had a newborn. All of those things are super important. So there is, like the Federal Medical Leave Act, there is federal protection for breastfeeding. And so we'll come back to that. There's a state law as well. On the right is a picture of a sign you can buy from Amazon to put on your door if you are indeed pumping at work. And what I've done since coming into a leadership role is when I have anyone on my team who's just come back from childbirth, who is planning on breastfeeding and pumping at work, I have a pile of these signs in my office and I give them one. I think it's really important that as a leader and as a colleague that we recognize that this is an important part of what we do as parents. So I try to be really supportive just so we can raise the knowledge of this issue. So in New York State, all private and public employers are subject to this law, regardless of size, that every person who wants to is entitled up to 20-minute breaks every 3 hours, up to 3 years after the birth of the child, which is a long time, and that the employer must provide a private space with a door and a lock near the workspace, with a chair, a small table, and although encouraged but not required, an electrical outlet and plumbing. It cannot be a bathroom. So everyone who wants to pump or breastfeed at work is entitled to have these things. It's a New York State law. So that's important. And then I want to talk a bit about flexible work schedules and part-time doctoring, which again, as a young attending, I did not think that this was a thing that people do. If your first thought is, I can't be a good doctor and work part-time, I will tell you that is not true. Patients perceive no difference in quality of care among physicians working more than 65 hours a week, 40 to 65 hours a week, and less than 40 hours per week. Part-time physicians are as productive per hour worked as full-time physicians and are more satisfied with their work. And relative productivity is virtually identical. So there's no difference in the quality of care we provide by part-time doctoring. But then people ask, is that actually a thing? So more physicians are reporting less than 30 hours a week every year. 25% of all physicians in large groups work part-time in 2011. That was up from 13% in 2005. This is, however, very specialty specific, and there's certain medical specialties that I think are better suited to shift workers. Hospice medicine fits nicely into this. ER medicine fits nicely into this. Primary care can fit nicely into this, but ambulatory medicine in particular does allow a little bit more flexibility. And there's always a business case for this as well. In primary care, we are constantly looking for providers who are interested in atypical hours. Patients want to be seen early in the morning and late in the evening. So I encourage all of our team members to think about flexible work schedules. Maybe you start really early, but you leave early so you can get your kids off the bus in the afternoon. So there is a demand for atypical hours among physician care. The only caveat I will give is that you do need to be careful as a part-time employee that you don't fulfill all of the work duties of a full-time person, but take the part-time salary. And I think women in particular tend to be prone to overwork. So it's something you really need to consider if part-time work is something that you're looking at. And then lastly, childcare support is a very important part of being a physician caregiver. Access to childcare is a major barrier, and Dr. Koshy did mention this, especially during the training years, which usually coincide with our childbearing years. 85% of female physicians have a spouse who also works outside of the home, so we are not usually blessed with a stay-at-home parent. Childcare support can be exceptionally expensive, so anywhere between $5,000 to $17,000 annually, and in certain parts of New York, it's even higher higher than that, which can be quite difficult on a resident or a fellow salary, especially while you're paying medical school debt. And so on-site childcare is particularly rare. So when looking at different programs, you're looking for places that might provide, as a resource to their employees, drop-in childcare for emergencies, that they have someone who can come to your home. There's companies called Bright Horizons that will contract with large health organizations to do so, that they may have on-site childcare, which is truly an amazing thing to have, and that, again, the flexible work hours really allow you to be home with your family when that's the necessary step. Okay, so ACP in their position paper does support all of these measures, and flexibility in structuring career paths in academic medicine, health systems, and private practice does allow promotion tracks that reflect the wide range of responsibilities and unique contributions of female physicians. So this is in the literature. ACP supports it. The last thing I'll leave you with is this another quote from Susan Hingle, where she talks about the kaleidoscope concept. We really think about work-life balance, work-life integration. She describes it as a kaleidoscope. And essentially, when you look through a kaleidoscope, every time you turn it, you get a different ratio of different colors and images that kind of pop up. And life is very much like that. So she defines success, or success is defining yourself, for yourself, what a beautiful life looks like from moment to moment and not having someone else define it for you, which I think really speaks to our flexible work schedules, parental leave, and really progressing in the workplace. So I am going to turn over the screen now to my colleague, Dr. Sagar, who is going to talk about mentoring, which is an exceptionally important part of what we do as women in medicine. Hold on. Here we go, Dr. Sagar.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Levine. So, I think, like Dr. Koch and Dr. Levine mentioned, they've already spoken about some of the most pressing issues for women in medicine, really. And the third aspect of our webinar that we thought about a lot was, well, how do we get support out to all of our audience? And I think mentorship in women in medicine is one of the ways that we can offer that to you. So really the learning objectives for this part of the talk is going to be recognizing the various forms of mentorship and sponsorship for women in medicine, and identifying resources to really build that community and that network for the women in medicine. So I know a lot of you might be wondering why there are so many feathers on my screen. I promise you we'll get to the bottom of it before the end of the talk. But really, why talk about mentorship, right? Why is it so important that we made sure to keep some time for it in our talk today? So first of all, clearly culture change needs to happen, right? And change needs to happen at multiple levels. It's not just on personal level, but even within a division, within a department, within the healthcare system in general. Now, medical centers and organizations have female employees, but they also have some female leaders. And the way I want you to view medicine is it's a sport, right? We talk a lot about the fact that we can have interdisciplinary care and all of those things, but the other way to look at medicine is you are the star athlete and you have the skill, you have the team spirit and the drive to want it all. The only difference is now you got to play like you belong on this field. Okay, so just like as if you were the star athlete and you need a little bit of coaching and some assisting and blocking and tackling things, that's where mentorship really comes into play. So when you think about mentorship, before we move on to the discrete aspects of mentorship, I really want you to think about an internal and external perspective, right? Think about a SWOT analysis that some of you might be familiar. So when we think about it, the internal perspective is, what strengths and weaknesses do I have? And the external perspectives is, what are the opportunities and potential threats on the outside that I need to be aware of and either I can leverage or I need to address? So take action and think about identifying people in your life, whether that's in your division, your department, professional society, or friends and colleagues who can help you build that external perspective. So the way that, let's say I was to do a SWOT analysis, right? And I want to work on my academic promotion from assistant to associate professor. So how would I do that? So strengths, right? So dedicated, passionate about medical education, health advocacy. Weakness, get overwhelmed when there are many projects due at the same time. Imposter syndrome, that's another very common finding in women in medicine and women in general. And now when I start to think about opportunities, okay, what can I do to really get that promotion package? It's going to be submission for workshops, at professional society meetings, being a mentor to other people. And threats would be that, let's say I wrote manuscripts and they're not accepted to well-known journals, right? But mentorship really plays a part in that portion. So my mentors can help me to address the threats, but also leverage some opportunities that I may not be aware of. So what's in a term, right? And this is a quote that I stole from Catalyst, which is a great website. And the source is right at the bottom of the slide for you if you want to check it out. A coach talks to you, a mentor talks with you, but a sponsor talks about you. So when you think about it, a mentor is a role model who helps you navigate your career, providing guidance for career choices and decisions. And you predominantly drive the relationship because the mentor is going to be reactive or responsive. You kind of reach out to them and say, hey, I'm really having a tough time doing XYZ. And really, the mentor is going to brainstorm with you. That's what a good mentor would do. And if they're not able to provide that, they'll find somebody who would. Sponsors are a little different. Sponsors are those senior leaders who use influence to help you obtain visibility or projects or talks. And these are the people who you may not even know are watching you. They drive the relationship because they're the ones who are advocating on your behalf behind closed doors. Okay. And they are the ones who are going to advocate for your advancement, champion your work among other senior leaders around the table. So just to point out the difference again, mentors are role models who you drive the relationship. Sponsors are senior leaders who then advocate without you necessarily approaching them. Now, if you happen to find a mentor who's also a sponsor, well, you got the golden ticket. Congratulations. So let's talk about mentors first. Mentoring is an act of generativity, meaning it's really a process of bringing somebody into your professional capacity and leaving them as a legacy to you. And studies have time again shown folks who are mentored garner more promotions, higher salaries, and more career satisfaction. Some studies have even shown that they're less stressed than those who lack mentorship. On the flip side, why become a mentor, right? Mentors actually gain creativity, rejuvenation. They also gain internal recognition and a sense of purpose and fulfillment. And as folks who go into healthcare, I think this resonates for a lot of us. So how do you begin to find a mentor? I'm going to steal Choosing Wisely, which is, big campaign. But really, it is about choosing wisely. You want to identify a role model, like I said, division, department, practice, workplace, who can commit to meeting you, right? Sometimes you may have to look into a professional society if you really want to look outside your immediate institute. Things to think about before you approach somebody. What's their track record on mentoring? Are they known to be others-oriented leader? Do they care about other people? Do you have shared values, right? Is there a specific skill they have that you want to develop? Or have they done X, Y, and Z? Or have they had this transition period? Have they kind of ran into a trouble that they were able to pull themselves out of? So best practices for the mentee, always ask, Don't presume a yes. Chances are you picked somebody who is phenomenal at what they do and they really want to be helpful, but their bandwidth might be limited. But always ask. Be sincere and specific why you're asking them, and share why you think this would be a good fit. And you could literally say, I think we would be a good fit because. Be engaged, be energizing. Most importantly, be clear on what you want from the relationship and why. Brene Brown wrote the book Dare to Lead, and one of the main themes in the book is clarity is kindness. So you want to be kind to your mentor, so be very clear. And always mind your mentor's time. Define goals ahead of your meeting, so when you go in to speak with them or on the phone or Skyping with them, make sure you have the agenda already set so that it can be more productive for both of you. Now, I'm fairly certain a lot of folks in the audience are going to be mentors, right? To be a good mentor is really to be Yoda-like. So you want to ask. Clarify what the mentee's goals really are. If you are unable to do that, go back to the drawing board and ask again. Be sincere and specific on what you can offer. Share your experience. Be engaged. Be clear on your bandwidth and time. Please try not to promise them a lot of time if you do have a limited scope right now. And like I said, it goes two ways, so you really do need to mind your mentee's time also. I do put this task on the mentor, which is identify the next meeting time ahead of closing out your meeting, because sometimes mentees may be shy to ask. So if you're a mentor for somebody, please tell them, let's find a time now before you leave. The other best practice for mentors is, using motivational interviewing, and a lot of us do this for our learners. We do this a lot for patients, and it's similar concepts, right? Open questions, refrain from yes or no, acknowledge, reflect, and summarize the barrier or conflict that the mentee is facing. So briefly about sponsorship. So this is a great HBR reference, and it's basically who is a sponsor. It is somebody who does all of these things. So can expand your perception, can help you build connections, promote your visibility, and offer opportunities. Sometimes, rarely, this may happen where they can even give you advice on your presentation and things, but I think mostly it's going to be about building your visibility and opening your perception a little bit. So what do sponsors really do for sponsees? So this is a study that was published in HBR, and it's called the sponsor effect, which is basically what you see is that for women, majority of the time, sponsors are going to expand their career vision and pump up their ambition, right? So that's the 68%. Of course, they're going to give career advice. But when you look at men, a majority of the time they're spending giving career advice. They're also identifying weak spots in performance and help finding remedies. But for women, on the flip side, they're really trying to amp you up. And literally, that's what a sponsor does. They lift you from where you are. So another way to think about it is sponsors open doors, right? Your relationship is inherently public in nature without you realizing it, because they're speaking about you behind closed doors. And I use the example of the Matrix because it really is like Neo and Morpheus, where Morpheus is a sponsor who's identifying Neo, but it's Neo who actually has to do the work. So be aware of the sponsorship effect. If you're looking for a sponsor, ask yourself, who do I have to get in front of to prove my credit, to prove my worth, to prove my project, to prove my concept? Make a list of people, ask your mentor who they would add on this list, and reach out to them. Be clear on what you want and why. The other important form of mentoring is peer mentoring, and this really is that support between colleagues within a division or within a department, and certainly been shown to improve significantly for rates of burnout and mentoring. It has also helped people improve their academic portfolios and performance. And lastly, when you are within a group setting, it is easier to pivot to the needs of the group. Great for collaborating on ideas and projects. Curbside mentoring is literally, that grand round speaker who you absolutely fell in love with, and you want to capture the email, send them a quick note, tell them why you loved their talk, what influenced you about them. Or even it could be a department chair or division leader who you haven't had the chance to meet in person. So that is going to be an important aspect of mentorship and sponsorship also. So let me briefly go over some resources to build you guys into a community of champions, really. So first and foremost, online websites. So these are a lot of websites that are online that do offer specific toolkits and guidance for all sorts of women in medicine type of programming. So I encourage you to use these links. Twitter is a great resource. So Dr. Levine, Dr. Koshi, myself, and New York ACP are active on Twitter. I do recommend you follow us, but also follow other women in medicine on Twitter. It is a great community to build off of. If you are more interested in getting the nitty-gritty data and concepts, there are a few podcasts I recommend. Curbsiders, which was mentioned earlier, Core IM, specific episode on stories of women in medicine, The Indicator, which is a financial podcast, but did a great series on gender pay gap, and the Harvard Business Review's Women at Work. Here's a bunch of articles. You guys can go ahead and get a kick out of reading these. They are some of the most cited articles in the literature as well as commonly in forums such as this for women in medicine and women and equality. And then this is the Empowered Library is what I like to say. And this was actually based off of our Twitter feed on what books are most recommended for women in medicine, or just folks in medicine in general, I should say. So really the Empowered Library, I recommend that you do pick up a few of these books in your library or download them or audiobook them. They will teach you really to be a better physician, a better family member, friend, but also be that advocate, that mentor, and how to look for sponsors. Last few thoughts. So this was a study done by the Pew Research Center, which showed how others perceive women in leadership and men in leadership. And you will see that women in leadership actually performed really well on pretty much everything, much better than the men, right? So if you think about creating that safe workplace, respect, valuing people of different backgrounds, considering societal impact of decisions, mentoring young employees, providing fair pay and good benefits, we do much, much better, or are perceived to do much better than our male counterparts, with the exception of negotiating. And that's a skill that really, I think, women in medicine can further develop over time, partly through forums such as this. Now, unfortunately, when you compare that to confidence that women exhibit in themselves compared to men, right? So you see that the curve down here, there's a big gap, right? And yes, that gap shrinks significantly, and then women are pretty much neck and neck going forward. This is a problem because this is the time when we are training, right? This period of time where you see the gap, the biggest is usually the time we're training, we're young physicians, we're young attendings, and we really do not feel that confident. And that's the time when you need this community to lean upon. Because if we can increase our ability and our confidence, I think we can definitely close this gap. Now, last bottom line, ask. You deserve it. You know the material, you have the skills, you deserve to be leading, running the organizations, all of those things. So be Shakira and ask, okay? Point to yourself in a meeting. Lift each other up. So when you are seeing other women proposing ideas or struggling, lift them, okay? I strongly believe that empowered women empower other women. And I think we are very lucky to have some great women leaders around us to pave the way. I do want to take a moment to talk about he for she, because, men have a very important role in equity and equality for women. Female empowerment is not about male disengagement or suppression. Equality for women is really equality for all. And it's really important to acknowledge a lot of our colleagues and our own mentors and sponsors who are men, but have staunchly supported and advocated for women around them. And I think, like Dr. Koshi and Dr. Levine pointed out, talking with male colleagues and building that transparency is important. And they can be phenomenal advocates. So I do want to give a big shout out to our he for she men who support this. Last thing, feathers, you guys asked. So birds and feathers really in various cultures represent different personalities, different traits, and I think they represent women very well because we are visionary, we are very brave, we're strong, we're kind, we're knowledgeable, we're proud, and I think that each one of you can fit this trait very easily. And that will bring us to questions.
Thank you, Dr. Segar, for the great takeaways. I'd also like to thank Dr. Koshi and Dr. Levine. Very important information for our women physicians. We have a few questions in the queue. I'd like to start out with the first one relating to you, Dr. Segar. Other than the work environment, where can I look for mentors and sponsors?
Okay, great question. So there's a couple, so professional societies have been really reaching out to get more women in medicine involved in the professional societies. So if you are part of a society, I encourage you to email them or call them and say, hey, I'm looking for guidance, mentorship, I want to be more involved and engaged. New York ACP, I'm going to make a plug for our newly minted mentorship program. If you're interested, we are continuing to enroll folks in there, so please do email New York ACP for that.
Great, thanks, Ankita. Do you know how the part-time work impacts the wage gap between women and men?
That would probably be for me. So it can impact the gap in a way. Most of the studies will adjust for time worked, and essentially that equal pay should equal work. So if you're working as a part-time employee, you should be paid exactly part-time or the same portion of what your part-time hours are. So if you're working half-time or a 0.5 full-time equivalent, we say, then your salary should be exactly half of a full-time person, regardless of gender. The only caveat I will make is that you want to avoid being put in the situation where you are working part-time but delivering full-time work, and that's something you should consider. So that might be a bit of a trap for women. So that's one thing I would say. Dr. Koshi, I don't know if you had anything else to add on that from your portion.
Yeah, so I would say that the studies that I've looked at part-time versus full-time and accounting for that still show amount of pay discrepancy or pay gap that we can work towards becoming exactly 0.5 FTE versus having that gender pay gap currently.
Great, thank you, Dr. Koshi and Dr. Levine. Where can we receive regular coaching to keep reminding ourselves about these issues, to keep them in front and center as we navigate the workplace?
I can start. I find Twitter to be really supportive in terms of the advocacy for women, by women, he for she. I get really motivated and happy to see, at least within my field, men speaking up for women and the efforts being made currently.
I was going to second that. I am on Twitter. You don't need to be an active Twitter poster to benefit from the wealth of information that is on Twitter. There's several. I think Dr. Segar mentioned the Women in Medicine chat is another thing that you can either participate in or follow along on. And then again, like Dr. Segar said, in your individual professional societies, most are starting to have women in whatever sections of their groups. So that's another place that you can really look for support outside of your day-to-day.
That's interesting. Our next question was, can we organize a Women in Medicine group within NYACP? Our answer is yes. We can work on this. So that was the final comment question in our queue today, ladies. I don't know if anybody has any last remarks they'd like to give the group. We're running, close to the end of the hour. Final remarks. Dr. Segar?
Sure. So I think that what I would like to say is this is only the beginning, right? Like this path is going to be paved as a lot of us build upon it. And I can say certainly that this is a long time coming, and I'm glad that we're finally here for women in medicine. So I want you all to go out there and say, yep, I'm here. Pick me. I can do this job better than you can.
Oh, great. Well, that's wonderful. Once again, I'd like to thank Dr. Koshy, Dr. Levine, and Dr. Segar. And I will be following up this broadcast with an email to everybody with information on how to get your CME credit. And please check out the NYACP website at nyacp.org for the recorded version. Share with your colleagues. It will be uploaded by the end of the day today. Thanks, everybody, for participating, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.